This and all talks at the 2019 JavaScript for WordPress Conference are brought to you in part by our sponsors Pantheon, a high-performance hosting platform with agile developer tools. Check them out at pantheon.io.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the last but certainly not least session of the JavaScript for WordPress conference. We're here in the track 1 for JavaScript. If you're joining us for the end of the day, my name is Christy Chirinos. I am your MC for this track 1. What I do with WordPress is I'm the product manager for Managed WooCommerce over at Liquid Web, so I'm happy to talk about that if that is anything you have any questions about. And today for our last session here in the JavaScript track, we have Andrew Taylor. He is speaking on using JavaScript and beyond in the browser. Andrew works at Pantheon, who is one of our wonderful sponsors today for the JavaScript for WordPress conference, so thank you. And he works at Pantheon helping the agency partners unlock the value of web ops by simplifying complex workflows, such as automation and testing with the Pantheon platform. He loves giving back to the open source community. Aside from being a conference speaker, he is also a contributor to WP Rig, a modern WordPress starter theme. When Andrew is not at the computer, he enjoys spending time with his family and getting off the grid on weekends, camping, hiking, or fishing. Before I hand off the floor to Andrew for our last session of the day, I do want to give that final shout out to our sponsors that made this possible, one of which is Pantheon and also Kinsta and Frontify. Thank you so much. And the rest of our sponsors you can see on the website and on the credit slides. Andrew, with that, take it away.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Christy. I'm really excited for this session. I spoke last year and it was still a technical topic, but very much web-oriented. And when I was chatting with Zach, this time we were talking about different things I could speak about and showing him some different projects. And he's like, wait, a lot of these aren't even using like developing websites that a lot of us kind of got our start doing. And so I really want to spend this time to explore JavaScript beyond the browser. And so we've developed these skills and how can we use them outside of just the normal kind of client work that we're doing day to day. So again, my name's Andrew Taylor, developer programs engineer at Pantheon, A Taylor ME on GitHub and Twitter. I sent out a slide link. So all the items in the slides that are blue here are actually links. If you want to go through, find those on Twitter, follow along with the slides and click through the resources and things like that, please do. And I started kind of thinking about this talk, looking at really how far has JavaScript gone beyond the web. And I started looking at GitHub has this nice project where they show just analyzing all of the data about all the projects on GitHub, and JavaScript has been the top language for the last 5+ years, just really, really solid, definitely taking over the web, but also just every project on GitHub. And there's all sorts of things built there beyond just web projects. And just wanted to call out, kind of watch out for TypeScript. Josh Pollock has a good blog article on getting started with TypeScript that I read the other day. It looks really interesting, kind of forces you to have some good standards and practices there, and it's a lot stricter. But if you can follow that, then you can know your code's going to be doing what it's supposed to a bit better, which is kind of cool. But WordPress itself is even becoming more JavaScript driven, like Gutenberg is a great example of that. And then looking just beyond the web, JavaScript is kind of taking over the world in general. I looked at some Google Trends and some other things, and like the amount of people that are becoming interested in JavaScript has really kind of exploded. And I just did this comparison with PHP, and womp womp, sorry PHP, JavaScript is more popular in pretty much most parts of the world. So it's really, JavaScript is taking over the world. And if you're a developer, you've been working on sites for a long time. I've been working with WordPress for more than 10 years and started in PHP, but I've picked up more and more JavaScript skills in the recent years. So hopefully if you've been following that trend and picking up JavaScript skills, taking some of Zach's courses and other things, then you can put those skills to use. And so not just building websites for clients and things like that, but go do something fun. Like, you have these skills in JavaScript. The language has kind of permeated so many things that you can do lots of cool stuff with it. So let's take a look at some of those things. Besides just writing JavaScript for the browser, of course, Node.js, it gives us the ability to run JavaScript on the server, but also on the command line, which is pretty cool as well. So if you haven't played around with Node, you can write a JavaScript file locally, run Node and then the file, and it will execute. And you can do all kinds of cool stuff there. And there are tons of package repositories with all sorts of things. So just go search for something random on NPM. I was developing this talk and I looked over and the TV in my living room has a Roku on it. So I just decided to search for Roku, and guess what? Someone developed a Node Roku client where you can actually control your Roku with JavaScript. So you can write a little Node application and run it, from your command line, and it will connect to Roku clients that are on the same network and be able to control them. So if I didn't want to get up from my computer and go pick up the remote, I like to do everything in the terminal, I could just pop it open and control a Roku. So tons of stuff like this you can just go check out and start playing around with things. And another thing I want to look at is automating your QA process. So let's what does that QA process mean? I'm going to look at the visual portion of this. If you do something like this, you're maintaining WordPress sites for yourself, for clients. My dad's company needs a website, so of course I built that too, right? We have tons of sites we maintain. So you go in and you have to run routine updates of WordPress core, plugins, themes, just security and feature updates. And you click update all. And then you, of course, are doing this locally or on a staging server. We don't want to update directly on our live site in case there's problems. So we're checking out our non-production site, our development site, and we're checking out the live site. And then if we're getting fancy, we are comparing them side by side, trying to figure out what went different. Maybe we're checking out mobile as well, kind of seeing what's going on there. But actually, in those slides that were just up, there was a change. And in this case, after I ran some updates, the search bar here, we have the live site on the right and the development site with the updates on the left. And you can kind of see that the word search has been added, which not a big deal. That label is now visible. But if you kind of squint in at it, you can see that the actual search button is sort of running over the boundary of the border of this containing div. And so this is actually an example of something I missed, but client noticed this. And of course, they're really picky about that stuff. They're like, why is this there? Why'd you let this go? So as humans, we kind of make errors. And this is sort of, we're just having to repeat this over and over. This was just looking at the home page. Well, what if we have multiple templates we need to check on multiple sites, and we need to check different viewports on all of them? It gets out of control really fast. And if we're being honest, we're probably not doing as thorough of a job as we could be. And so I propose that we make JavaScript do the work. You can also run this in a continuous integration or something. I've given other versions of automated testing workshops where I say make the robots do the work, but this is, of course, a JavaScript conference. So we're going to make JavaScript do the work. And this is an example of what a report run on those same sites looks like. Actually run with JavaScript and headless Chrome, coming in, taking screenshots, and then comparing the difference. And this is much easier for me as a human to look at, immediately see what changed, and then I don't have to spend my time or my mental energy looking at all these templates. The report tells me where the change is, and I can just decide if it's acceptable or not. In this case, it's not So I would go in and update the CSS and what I need to get that button fixed, and then deploy my updates. And the tool that created that report is called BackstopJS. It's built on headless Chrome, and if you played with headless Chrome, you can do a lot with it just on the command line. You can actually run Chrome from the command line. Headless just means it's not opening a browser window. Like we're looking at a browser window right now, so the browser still runs. It just doesn't give you a display window. And you can take screenshots and do these things with Chrome on the command line, but it gets really clunky to remember all these long commands, type them out, and make Chrome do what you want. So Google actually developed a package called Puppeteer, which gives you an API to work with headless Chrome in JavaScript, which is really, really cool. If you have done looked at some indent testing and things, you might have seen Puppeteer being used there. But in that case, Puppeteer can do anything that Chrome can do. So it can view pages, it can fill out forms, it can do all kinds of crazy stuff. In this case, all I want to do is take screenshots of 2 pages and compare them. If I were to use just Puppeteer, I could do that in JavaScript, but then I would still need to manually, use the node file system and save the images and compare them and make sure that they were the same and generate the report and all of that stuff. And that's where BackstopJS comes in. It's this great package that takes care of making Puppeteer take the screenshots, doing the comparison, and generating the report for you. But BackstopJS takes some work to set up. You have to give it a configuration file, tell it the URLs you want to test, the viewports you want to test, and this is a JSON file that you go in. If you install Backstop, it can run on the command line as a global application, and you can do backstop init, and it will help scaffold one of these files for you. But then I was going in and doing something like this on every project, where I was running backstop init. I was having to take the default configuration and update it with the URLs I wanted to do. I would have to remember the commands to run, and it worked pretty well. I could go in and do this, but then I had backstop, on lots of different projects, and I was repeating this over and over. And even though I got familiar with it, it was hard for other people on my team and other folks to come in and be able to work with this and set this up. So even though I'd gone through this learning curve, it was still a struggle for other people who hadn't gone through this learning curve to use the tool. And so I started looking into different ways you can use Backstop. If you go over to their GitHub repo, you can actually see that you can install it as a node dependency and use Backstop directly inside of Node.js, which is great because the same sort of commands I was running on the command line, we can just run here with JavaScript. And the other thing I noticed too, which was really cool, is instead of creating this JSON file, which my little, animated GIF there was just showing a quick init, and I just put in the home page, but it got really cumbersome to maintain these long JSON files for every project that had multiple templates, multiple URLs to check. And so Backstop has some examples, and one of them is a JavaScript-based configuration, which is really, really cool because now you can go in and actually write our configuration in JavaScript, and you just need to export an object there that has the same things that you would put in the JSON, which is really cool. So you can come in and do things like set up viewports. Here they have a home page and stuff. And so this example really kind of got me thinking. Now that I can use Backstop inside of Node, and we know that Node will let us write command line applications with JavaScript, can I combine these two? And so I looked for a package. We talked about that at the beginning, looking for packages so you're not recreating the wheel, and found one called Commander that helps you create command line applications with JavaScript. You can take different arguments and things, so dash dash, and different flags with your command line tool. Helps you scaffold commands and things. And it's really, really neat. And so I took this. I also took a package called Inquirer, which will help with prompting the user. So you can pass in questions and then you get back answers of what someone actually selects on the terminal on the command line, which is really, really cool. So you can prompt like, are you sure you want to proceed? Yes or no? Please select something, these sorts of things. Really useful when you're building a command line application. And so I took all of these pieces, and using my JavaScript skills, I was able to build a command line application that will run BackstopJS for me. So instead of going into a new project and running the init and creating this big JSON file by hand and stuff, I actually keep a list of all the projects I have. I can select between them when I start this Node app, and then go in and it fires off Backstop and gives me the report. So whenever I'm updating WordPress sites, now I go in, I update my sites, and I'm routinely updating the same ones. So once I have them listed in the application, I just run my updates, run the app. It generates a report comparing my local or the staging server against the live site. I can use the report and then move on. And it saved me many, many hours of QA having to go in and actually do this comparison manually. So I think this is a great example of using JavaScript outside of web development. We're actually using it to make our lives easier during the QA process. And this Node app I built originally for WordCamp Europe last month, did a workshop on visual regression testing and automating your QA. But I wanted to share the example repository with you all. You can download this. You can start using it. And I actually want to dive into some of the code, and we can take a look at what's going on and actually what JavaScript is going into this. So the workshop is over. It was last month at WordCamp Europe. But if you want to go in and kind of use the app and some of the steps, there's some nice instructions here in the README, but we're going to really break some things down. So I'm using Babel to compile the JavaScript I'm writing. I want to use more modern syntaxes and things similar to you might compile for browser support. Not all versions of Node, even current versions, support everything inside of modern JavaScript practices. So the browser doesn't support it. Node doesn't support some things as well. So we still need a compilation step. So I have two directories here. Source is the code I'm actually writing, and dist is kind of the production app. And I set up a script I can run. So I can do npm run build, and it will actually rebuild the app. So anytime something in the source directory is edited, you need to do npm run build again and rebuild. But that is a very quick process, which I can show you here. So npm run build, it just removes that directory and then rebuilds it with Babel. And it's pretty fast, and you only need to do it if you edit something. So we come in, look at the source directory. First thing I'll show you all is the index file. This is the main entry point for our application. So bringing in Commander and Inquirer and some of those things that I'm using. If you've worked with JavaScript for browsers and things, or React and played around with Gatsby or some of these other stuff, this should look very familiar, like importing dependencies and things. But now we're just using these skills to create a command line application instead. Sites to test, we will take a look at as well before we continue. So this is just a list of the sites I want to test. And this is actually what saved me quite a bit of time using the feature of Backstop, where we'll take a look at how we're generating our Backstop configuration with JavaScript. But now I can just have an array of URLs that are the paths I want to test. I have a production URL and a non-production URL. Those are the two I'm going to compare. And then I give each site a label so that when the application runs and you're prompted to select a site, you can choose from one of these. And so if you were to, this is a template repository on GitHub. If you want to create your own example from it, you would just come in here and edit this file that has the list of sites with your own sites, do npm run build again to rebuild the application. Cool, and so we're bringing in the list of our sites to test. I'm using object.keys just to make sure that there actually are sites listed. Otherwise, we're throwing an error and kind of exiting the application. You can set program version and stuff with Commander, which is pretty cool. And this is an example. You can take parameters here. So instead of, if I just do npm run start, it's going to parse the entire list, and I will get prompted to select a site, but I can also specify a site by taking a command here. So I can come in and do that, and it's going to run the test on that specific site that's listed, which is really nice because that means if you're using a continuous integration service or something where you aren't going to sit there at the terminal and select from a prompt, now you could actually take this application and run it on Circle CI or Travis or GitLab or Bitbucket or whatever. Maybe whenever you run updates or do pull requests or these sorts of things, it really makes us flexible local machine. And so in that time, this was the example report I had where there were a couple of errors, those mismatches. So it's just surfacing that and letting me know. And so if someone does not choose a site, then we go ahead and loop through all of our sites to test. And then we prompt which site do you want to use, and you select one. So we can let that run, and then once we have an answer, we run this function visual regression test site, which is also in the source directory here. And so I'm prompted if I select a different one, then it's going to run the test on the different site I selected. And again, you'll just need to edit that sites to test whenever you want to add a new project. But once it's in there and you've rebuilt the app, then it's there for good and you shouldn't have to update it that often. So much easier to maintain this single file with the list of all the sites and the templates I want to test than to maintain a JSON configuration for every different project and make sure those get updated and deployed. I like having everything in one place. And this is taking a bit longer to run because I have more URLs to test. So it is each of them. The Node application I wrote to help automate my QA testing. And so using those JavaScript skills outside of just web development, but to improve other parts of my workflow. And so you can see here, this is actually the function that's running BackstopJS. So we're coming in, we're checking if the site that's been requested exists, throwing an error if it doesn't, storing the site, just saying that we're running our test, and then generating a backstop configuration from the details of the site, and then coming in and running backstop and getting the output. And so if we go look at the backstop configuration, this is kind of the last piece, is we're taking some of the values that were set in our list of sites to test, like the production and non-production URLs, and outputting a configuration. So I have kind of a template here. If you want to edit viewports and things, there's some variables up at the top about like delay time and threshold. Backstop has tons of documentation on all the different things you can do. Since it's based on Puppeteer, you can actually do quite a bit. So you can fill in items before you take the screenshot, that kind of thing. It won't replace end-to-end testing. It's not meant for that. So if you're trying to fill out a form or something else, then you're better off with a different tool, but this is just to help with the visual comparison, though it can do some simple things. And you can also come in here and hide selectors. So if you have dynamic content, maybe an ad that changes on every page load or something, that'll cause the visual test to fail. You can remove those just by entering a list of CSS selectors here. And then just taking all of our paths to test that we define for each site, mapping over them, and adding those as scenarios. So again, just using JavaScript to help us generate this config rather than having to write out JSON by hand every single time. Cool. So hopefully you can play around with that repository, take a look at the code. It's fairly simple, but if checking on visual updates is something that you do quite a bit, then hopefully you can actually use that and put some of your JavaScript skills to use. Also encourage you to look at React Native. Really cool. You can use JavaScript in React to write native mobile applications. So not just progressive web app kind of in-browser applications, but actually native apps for iOS and Android, which is really cool. I don't have a deep example to dive into there. There's tons of them out there and they have great tutorials, but if mobile application development is something your clients have been asking for and you're thinking, you know, I'm not a Swift developer or something else, then check out React Native. This next example is kind of a fun one, and we're getting even farther away from web development. So when we were talking about visual testing, we're still kind of testing our website. So even though it wasn't JavaScript in the browser, it was still web related. This is not website related at all, really. This is creating Slack bots with JavaScript. So you might have heard of serverless functions. It's essentially where JavaScript runs and you don't have to worry about the infrastructure behind it. You just supply some code and the provider takes care of that. This is a Google Cloud Functions example. They have a tutorial that shows you how to make a Slack bot and it will respond to slash commands. And instead of leaving a server running the entire time, your JavaScript that you're writing just gets executed when someone makes a call for that slash command. So pretty cheap, very scalable, and kind of fun to play around with. So if you think a Slack bot would be useful, maybe you have coworkers who are asking you the same sorts of questions all the time, then go create a Slack bot to help them out and auto-generate some answers. They also had a good webinar series that was recorded, so you can go watch the recording about using Slack with Google Cloud Functions. But you don't have to use Google Cloud Functions. You can use AWS Lambda or lots of the other ones that are out there. Slack actually has a framework called Bolt, not to be confused with a Slack bot, but Slack Bolt helps you build Slack bots. Say that 10 times fast. And it's really cool. You can come in and again, when you're writing JavaScript, you can require their framework and it will help you out with building Slack bots. So it can do things like make calls to the API and stuff for you, has those wrapped in some nice methods that you can make use of. So if you're interested in building a Slack bot, definitely check out their Bolt framework. And we saw a glitch in some of the other talks, kind of a cool code playground where you can collaborate with other folks and spin up examples. They have a Slack project on there where you can go in and sort of see different things people have done. So if you want to take a look at like, here's Slack and on Node with Express and some of these things, or an example of the Bolt framework in practice, you can go take a look at some of those and kind of remix them and play around with them on Glitch in a pretty lightweight way. So fun stuff to play around with and develop on. This next one is really fun as well, and getting even farther away from the browser. So Google Apps Scripts lets you use JavaScript to control the G Suite apps. So this presentation I'm giving is in Google Slides, or there's Docs, Spreadsheets, Gmail, Calendar, Drive, Maps, all kinds of stuff. And you can actually write JavaScript to control them, which is really, really cool. And so you have access to a ton of libraries. So it's essentially JavaScript, plus you have a bunch of classes that Google provides you to help control all of these applications. And so they have an example of sending emails from a spreadsheet, where you go in and have a list of folks in a spreadsheet, and you can run a function and it will send an email to all of them. And you can, get creative with this. Maybe you have a template inside of a doc and you read that, and then you source the emails from a spreadsheet, and you can kind of combine these different things to develop some pretty complex functionality. One of our teams at Pantheon that helps our clients understand what's going on with their sites and their data actually pulls items from the New Relic API and then uses Google Apps Script to generate a slide deck that has screenshots of New Relic and relevant data to give to the clients and do some reporting. So really, really awesome real world implications there that can save you some time and are just fun to do. And so my real world problem, we don't have enough time to get into anything that deep, but I get a lot of emails, and we use Gmail. So this was a great example with Google Apps Script. But whenever I read emails, I use the filters capability a lot with Gmail. You can come in and actually have labels and things automatically applied if emails come from a certain address or have a certain subject line, that sort of thing. And so a lot of my emails come in, they already have a label applied. So JavaScript for WordPress ones would get the conference label and probably the WordPress label. And so once I've read an email, if I don't need to take an action on it, they just kind of sit here at the bottom of my inbox. And I'd have to go through and click on them and archive them. And doing that manually just kind of was a bummer. I like to keep my inbox clean, started working towards inbox 0 a couple of years ago. But I was able to use AppScript to help out with this. So now, after I've read emails, I don't have to worry about it because I have a script that will go in and actually archive them all. I went in and I'm refreshing Gmail here, but it will auto refresh every couple of minutes. So these will just, as my inbox sits there during the day, if there's things I've read, they'll start getting auto archived, which is really, really cool. And I don't have to worry about it. So if I want to save something, I actually put a star on it, and that will make sure that it does not get archived. Maybe that's something I still need to reply to or take action on. But otherwise, if it's just sort of an FYI email and I've read it, then they can just get auto archived. And to do this, I am using the GmailApp class. So I said you get a bunch of classes that are provided to you when you write these Google Apps Scripts. This is one of them. And there are a ton of methods. And they're classes for all kinds of different services. So just go in, explore the documentation, and take a look at some of the different things you can do. But you can draft messages, you can do things with threads and existing messages, manage labels, archive, search, star, unstar, all kinds of things. Attachments. So you can get really fancy here if you wanted to. But I kind of wanted to walk you through step by step exactly how I was making this this example and got JavaScript to help me reach inbox 0. So I want to archive threads that are in the inbox that have already been read and they have a label. And then also exclude starred items. We want to keep those in the inbox. So you have to write a function, one main function that's going to be the trigger for your script. I called mine archive inbox. And so inside of that function, I'm using the GmailApp class. There's a search method. So if you've ever done advanced search in Gmail, you can do like in::inbox and is read and all sorts of things. So I'm able to go in and target just the emails I want. And so this will actually get the entire thread in Gmail. Each email and the replies and things are all chained together in threads. And so I get the threads that meet my requirements here and then loop through them. So now that I have all the threads that are in the inbox, they have a label and they've been read, then I'm going to use the method to check if the current thread has a starred message somewhere in it. And if it does, we're just going to skip it because we want to leave those starred messages in the inbox. Otherwise, we're going to continue on and use the methods to archive it, refresh our status for that thread. And when you're using these scripts, there is some rate limiting in there. So I just put a small sleep to avoid that rate limiting inside of my loop. And so this is the entire example. It's in the slides. If you're curious and you want to use it yourself, feel free to go ahead and grab it. But you can see in not much JavaScript, and this is, pretty basic JavaScript, not even newer syntaxes or anything. We're just going in and we're able to take care of our inbox and help with that. And then the last piece was I didn't want to have to go in and manually run this every day to clean up my inbox. So they have triggers that you can run these automatically, and they have different sort of events that can trigger these. I chose a time event. And so this script actually runs every minute. And so as I'm reading emails throughout the day, especially if I'm taking the dog for a walk or something, I read something on my phone. I don't want to sit there and have to archive stuff as I'm going along. This script will run every minute and take care of it for me. And one thing I found with using this trigger is sometimes the script would run as I was actually reading an email before I got a chance to start it, to let my script know that I want to keep it in the inbox. So I just added another section that goes through, finds all the starred items that are not in the inbox, loops through them, and then moves them back to the inbox. So this runs as well. And that way, if there's something that gets archived faster than I can get a star on it, then I bring it back to the inbox. Hopefully this gives you some ideas of things you might be able to do with G Suite. I talked about auto-generating, presentations from data. You could come in and have a template in Google Docs, have some dynamic data in spreadsheets, and go in and fetch that and replace placeholders in the template doc with actual data from the spreadsheet, save the whole thing as a PDF, attach it to an email, and automatically send it to a client and set that up for a weekly or monthly trigger. And now you're sending your clients reports automatically as long as you keep your spreadsheets up to date. You can do some pretty crazy stuff with it. So definitely check it out. It's one of the cooler things I found to actually use JavaScript outside of the browser to do some fun stuff. And so I really want to encourage you just overall to use your imagination. We've touched on just a very few kind of simple examples of how you can use JavaScript outside of the browser and outside of web development. But I'll leave you with one last example that's a bit more advanced. Is Lando is a local development tool that helps you run an instance on Docker. So you can create multiple Docker containers, for PHP, database, if you're doing Node, any of that kind of stuff. And it's a native application, runs on Mac, Windows, and Linux. And the entire thing is written in JavaScript, which is pretty crazy. So a really, really advanced application. My little site QA application was pretty simple, but you can use JavaScript to actually develop a full product like this, and something that you can do well beyond what I thought was possible with JavaScript, just doing web development. So tons of really cool stuff you can do. I would encourage you to explore Node, explore command line applications, explore some of these things that are outside the browser. Have some resource links in here as well. Some of the Google Apps Scripts tutorials and things. There are also links throughout all of the slides, so you can go back and check those out. Again, A. Taylor ME on GitHub and Twitter, and link to the slides is up here. I appreciate everyone sticking with it, following through to the end of the session, and definitely do grab the slides and feel free to come back to this later. If you have questions on the Node application for like visual QA, you can open an issue on GitHub, or reach out to me on Twitter or whatever. Happy to follow up with folks later as well.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. And that is actually the end